Hello and welcome. My name is Justin Phillips. I'm going to be doing a short presentation on net neutrality and the ethical nature of the FCC's recent ruling in 2010 extending their enforcement and ban of certain practices under it. This is an academic project for FIU. So in this presentation I will be giving a brief overview of net neutrality and a little history. I'll also be going over the ethical test that will be used, which is utilitarianism, and also I'll look into who the ethical players are in the action and what the action actually was. Also look into the more in depth into each player. So you have the consumer and the provider. I'll be discussing both of those, and then I'll discuss a little bit more about utilitarianism and who was in the right, wrong, ethically bad, ethically good, or ethically neutral, and the outcome of the test. And lastly, I'll be having a few questions and posting some references. Net neutrality. What is it? What's its history, and why is it important? Net neutrality is a principle where all traffic or packets on a network are treated as equal. You could think of it like a toll road and multiple companies providing different tolls to different roads, and whether or not you're a client of one company, you're allowed onto their tolls, but if you're not another, you're not allowed through their tolls on their roads. You could see this create a massive headache if all tolls weren't just run by the state. So from 2005 to 2010, the FCC enacted many rules regarding net neutrality for the internet and ISPs. Net neutrality is a very complex and polarizing topic of discussion, as you can see, because there are many players, many businesses, and many consumers involved. The ethical test I will use in this presentation is utilitarianism. Utilitarianism provides for the ethical good action to consist in the greatest good for the greatest number, in maximizing the total benefit without regard to distribution or burden. That's Driver 2009. Thus the criterion of virtue is utility. Whatever can be utilized for the most common or the greatest positive effect is the most virtuous or ethically good of the actions. The federal government is viewed as responsible for the overall well-being. They make laws for the well-being of their citizens. Thus, I think utilitarianism fits well here. So who are the ethical players in this action, and what was the action? Well, in 2010, the FCC adjusted their net neutrality policy to include a ban on, quote, unjust or unreasonable discrimination in charges, practices, classifications, end quote, and a host of other things. This was centered around the disagreement between Netflix and Comcast, where Netflix was providing the same video services as Comcast, but they were utilizing Comcast bandwidth to push their traffic back and forth, and Comcast was throttling them. So the FCC was effectively banning these types of practices that Comcast was doing. So you have three main players. You have the FCC, who made the rules. You have the consumers, who are by far the largest group in the action, and they stand to gain and lose a lot from this. And you also have the ISPs that are smaller in number, but they are the pillars of the internet. They provide the backbone, the infrastructure, and the investment for it. So I'm sure you all know who the FCC is as future computer scientists and IT professionals. But let's talk about two of the people, or two of the groups affected by this action, the consumer and the ISP. Consumers expect to really have a control over what they see on the internet and where they can go. It's been one of the founding principles of the internet since its conception. So net neutrality really, in some of the adjustments that the FCC has made, preserves the freedom of speech on the internet. It also prevents the internet from being managed like the telecom industry with overregulation, and it also promotes innovation and competition with consumer products that are hosted on the internet. ISPs are the pillars of the internet. They have invested billions into the internet's infrastructure. They own the backbone, and therefore they have a right to manage it how they please. Net neutrality has the potential to discourage future investments into this infrastructure due to the loss of control that ISPs will have over management and business models. Nobody wants to have the government step in and say, hey, this is how you're going to make money and this is how you're going to manage your business. This could lead to poor quality of service, as we may have less bandwidth, or we could have the same bandwidth we have today, but as technology progresses, apps and technology will just consume more and more bandwidth. So let's summarize. Utilitarianism promotes the many over the few. However, the outcome to this action is complex. While the consumer has short-term gains from net neutrality, future quality of service may suffer with the ISPs. There's nothing like the internet to compare this to, so conclusions are difficult to reach. Consumers have far greater numbers, and they'll receive many benefits from net neutrality. However, that comes at a cost, and how do you balance this cost? It's a lot more complex than just this group versus this group. Lastly, you have ISPs. They have ownership, rights, and many valid concerns over net neutrality. They represent the few, but they are also the gatekeepers. Test outcome and conclusions. Utilitarianism dictates the action that affects the greater number with the greater benefit is the ethically good action. The consumer, in this case, is the masses. They pose the benefit from freedom and equality that net neutrality offers. However, ISPs are still critical to the internet and have valid concerns, as they determine the quality of service that the consumer experiences. So the FCC, by siding with consumer benefit here, is siding with the masses in the short term, but in the long term, they may not. Therefore, it's a very complex outcome, and there will be a paper forthcoming on the actual outcome. Finally, questions and references. The first question, how does net neutrality affect you? Next, what are your thoughts about the arguments against net neutrality? And finally, was the FCC's action ethical? Was it ethically good? Was it ethically neutral? Or was it ethically bad? Finally, you can view the references here. As I said before, there will be a paper forthcoming with the actual results to the test in more detail. Thank you for listening and watching.